Hello, I'm Mark Bridge. Welcome to this week's feature from thephonecast.com. As 2011 draws to a close and the mobile phone industry gears up for what promises to be an eventful and potentially challenging year ahead, we've been asking some of our favourite experts and business leaders to tell us what they think is most likely to happen in 2012. Coming up later, we'll be hearing from Steve Litchfield, Dr. Windsor Holden, Dr. Mark Smith and Jack Wraith, MBE. But first, I spoke to Hans Eriksson, the executive chairman of Bambuser.
Bambuser is a company that enables pretty much anyone with a smartphone or a computer to broadcast live and interactive video to the internet. We ourselves thought end of last year that Bambuser was an application that would get its most attention in countries where the technology infrastructure was very much developed, and not the usage of Bambuser by human rights activists in Northern Africa and the Middle East during the uprising and the Arab Spring, where Bambuser was extensively used by human rights activists to get live video content out directly to anyone in their own country and outside of the countries, and that took us a lot by surprise. Bambuser has very much become a tool for grassroots movements, and we've seen the Occupy movements not only here in Europe but also in the US and in Canada using Bambuser, and we're seeing people in South America using it for the same reasons as well, which to us is very encouraging. And we've also gotten great recognition from human rights activist organizations around the world, thanking us and supporting us for what we're doing and the software we're actually supplying. From what we've seen over the past year, it's been an absolutely true pleasure to the founders and all the staff in the company to see how it's been used, how it's been utilized, and how creative people have been in utilizing it, and how grateful people have been about our service, and also how much we have engaged in helping out, in making people understand how to better utilize it, and also how we have developed the product over the past year in order to fit in for human rights activists in a better way.
Looking to the future now, Hans, it's been an exciting year for you in 2011. Next year, 2012, what do you see happening, not just in Bambuser, but also in the wider mobile telecom space as well?
That's a big question. Being biased, though, as working with a product like Bambuser, I think 2012 is really going to be the year when people at a more general level start using live video services like Bambuser. There are others as well, of course, very much due to how the infrastructure have developed over the past 6 to 12 months in terms of better handsets, in terms of improved 3G networks, in terms of the understanding of how much data costs using it from your mobile, and how interactive and how real-time a service like these are. So I think that's something that's going to happen big time next year. I think another thing that's going to happen that includes online video as well is that we're going to see a massive transfer of advertising money from TV to online video, and especially if we see a downturn in global economies as well, as online video is a much easier way of measuring your advertising money on, and you can immediately see results and effects of your campaign. So I think the trend has started, and I think it's going to tip over during the next year. I think that the mobile industry at a large, if you look at application suppliers, they're going to keep on developing and looking at the price structure of applications and how they work. It's not the first thing you're going to cut down on as a consumer. So I do believe that you're still going to buy your Angry Birds game, but you may be cut down on buying some clothes, or you may be cut down on travel. But buying a game or buying some other software is not the first thing that you're going to cut. So I see a good future for that community. Looking at mobile phone sales and the mobile phone market at a large, I do believe it's going to grow, and it's going to grow massively, as well as smartphone has become the new computer, and it's a much cheaper way of being online, communicating, than buying a computer or a standalone PC.
So more people getting online around the world, more people using Bambuser services.
More people getting online, definitely, and hopefully way more people starting using Bambuser as well.
Thank you again to Hans Eriksson. Someone else whose opinion I value is technology journalist Steve Litchfield, a man whose work I've followed since I acquired my very first Psion organizer. Last year, I said that 2011 would be a good year for the BlackBerry Playbook, and I realised I was in trouble the moment that Steve disagreed. Here's what he thinks the mobile industry landscape will look like in 2012.
Hey there, Mark Bridge asked me to give my forecast for the phone world for 2012. This is Steve Litchfield here from The Phone Show. Also at stevelitchfield.com. Don't forget the T in Litchfield, and you'll find links to what I do. I've got a fairly good track record of predicting the mobile world, with one or two exceptions. So let's start with iPhone. I think we'll go from strength to strength the first half of the year. Sometime around the summer, the iPhone 5 will launch, but without Steve Jobs' guidance, and allowing for the fact they're going slightly outside the core iPhone fan base here. I think the 5 will struggle just that tiny bit and will have issues initially, especially with battery life and getting through the day. They will solve them eventually, though, and I think the iPhone market share certainly won't go far down from its current levels. Android, I have to say, I think Android's going to start stalling in terms of market share growth. They've kind of half saturated the market, really, and they're Android phones now at almost all price points, and most people who want an Android phone in most markets have actually already got one. So I think the market share growth will slow down dramatically. I think Android is going to have problems with fragmentation and different manufacturers putting different skins on. There really isn't the same platform identity as on other platforms, and I think Android will suffer as a result. I would even be prepared to say that Android's market share will go down in 2012. BlackBerry and Symbian, both in gradual decline, of course, in their latter years, but still, I did note in other podcasts that even in the last quarter 3 2011, more Symbian smartphones were sold worldwide in the quarter than iPhones, which no one would believe, but it's true. So BlackBerry and Symbian still selling decent numbers if you look at the raw numbers of handsets sold, despite the actual profit margins being quite low. Obviously, the sales will decline over 2012. Both platforms are winding down in a sense. I expect them both to be down in sort of single digits market share worldwide by the end of the year. Windows Phone is the new boy. I don't expect it'll get above 10% market share by the end of 2012. Microsoft itself will say this is a huge success. We've achieved 10% market share with their partners. The industry analysts may say, well, that's not good enough, really. You needed to be much higher to be competing with iOS and Android. But I have to say, overall, though, the smartphone market is still growing. There's still plenty of room for everybody to make a killing, everybody to sell lots of handsets. And most encouraging feature is that all the platforms are converging in a way. All the best bits of the user interfaces, and each of the platforms is all being copied right, left and centre. Lawyers be damned. So the ultimate winner is the end user. So yes, rock on 2012. Going to be another storming year, and if the pace of the last half of 2011 is anything to go by, I shall be utterly exhausted by the end of it. So thanks for listening. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Litchfield, stevelitchfield.com. I also write for allaboutSymbian.com and also allaboutwindowsphone.com. So do find me there. Bye for now.
This programme is sponsored by 51degrees.mobi, providing device data and mobile device detection for thousands of companies online. To learn more, just type 51degrees.mobi into your mobile phone browser or desktop web browser. That's the digits 51 and then degrees, DEGREES.MOBI.
Hi, this is Windsor Holden, and I'm the Research Director for Juniper Research, with my thoughts on what are likely to be the top mobile trends for 2012. Well, firstly, we believe that the recession is likely to have a negative impact on smart device sales, particularly in the case of unsubsidized devices. Our take is that given the extent to which smartphones have already become a near must-have device in the consumer space, then the impact here will be less significant than for tablets, where it may well reduce the extent to which these devices penetrate the wider market, particularly across Western Europe. Now, the effects here will be most acutely felt in the premium tablet sector, where net device sales could plateau or even decline. But conversely, the reduction in average purchasing power could conceivably benefit players such as Amazon and Argos, inasmuch as cash-strapped consumers may opt for the lower-priced Kindle Fire or an Arnova-branded device rather than the iPad. We also think it's likely that a prolonged downturn could have a serious negative impact on sales of dedicated e-readers, which are essentially nice-to-have devices rather than must-have. As discretionary spend falls, then e-readers are most likely to be affected. On a more positive note, we believe that the London 2012 Olympics is likely to boost mobile advertising and gambling, and will also provide something of a kickstart to NFC. To take the advertising first, we believe that we'll see brands particularly keen to employ location-based advertising and marketing to drive sales. We are also likely to see far more widespread usage of augmented reality within mobile marketing, using both image recognition and markerless tracking techniques. It's also worth observing that the Games and the Euro 2012 football tournament in Poland and Ukraine should drive a wider adoption within the mobile gambling space, particularly across continental Europe, where markets are becoming increasingly liberalised. While near-field communications, NFC, have as yet failed to gain significant traction beyond developed Asia, we believe that the Olympics offer service providers such as Loyalty FB, Samsung and Visa the opportunity to deploy NFC solutions to far greater effect. Hence, we're likely to witness a surge of deployments and rapid uptick in adoption in the run-up to the Games. Finally, we believe that mobile coupons have the opportunity to drive mobile commerce market despite economic stagnation. There's significant evidence to suggest that as economic conditions worsen, then consumer uptake of consumer-based discounts becomes more extensive. Juniper Research believes that the austere financial climate will act as a further stimulant to this trend, with the mobile couponing market already accelerating as part of a more wholesale usage of m-commerce, a key beneficiary. This has been Windsor Holden, Research Director of Juniper Research, with our take on the key trends for 2012. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Windsor Holden. Before him, you heard technology journalist Steve Litchfield. From one doctor to another, it's been just over 2 years since we first talked to Dr. Mark K. Smith, the founder of iPadio, a service that turns a phone call into a live web broadcast. He's a man who talks a lot of sense, which made him an obvious choice to turn to for some more predictions.
It's often said that predictions are only really made by fools, and most of you get them wrong, so I'm quite happy to carry on now and make a few predictions. But first of all, I wanted to reflect a little bit on what iPadio's done over the last 12 months. I don't want to go on about this because it's not that significant, but we've picked up we have around 100,000 members now, and our website serves out many millions of web pages, several tens of thousands of sessions per day. Probably the most interesting statistic that I've come across recently is that in the last 12 months, 8 of those months, the largest country traffic to our website has been from the US. And in 1 month, it actually exceeded 2/3 of our traffic came from America. So that's an interesting lesson for us as to where eyes might focus in perhaps in 2012. But looking at the mobile world in general, it's not a terribly incisive comment to suggest that there will be an increase in smartphone uptake during the next 12 months. There plainly will. And we're already looking, I think, in the UK, or maybe this is worldwide, but I've certainly heard the statistic in the UK, around 1/3 of all telephones are now smart. Smart simply means that they've got data connectivity and a means by which they can interact with the web and email and so forth. That is a cracking demonstration of marketing from the handset providers, particularly to younger people, and also a cracking demonstration of connecting to social media whilst on the move, which is at least in part why they do that. The thing that interests me most, though, and the prediction I might regret saying, but I believe will be true, 3G connectivity is crap. Now, how can I prove that? Well, there was an Ofcom survey that was published in the last 4 weeks that actually proved what I knew to be true and most of us know to be true, and that was the geographic coverage, and I'm very careful with my words here, the geographic coverage of a 3G signal in the UK is around 50%. The geographic coverage of a 2G signal, so a signal that allows you to make a phone call and send a text message, is close to 99%. Now, if you're at home, you live in a village or a town, you might not appreciate the challenges this brings. But if you're mobile, and by that I mean you're in sales, or you're an engineer, or you've got peripatetic aspects to your work, which is the case for a huge number of us, then the reliance on smartphones and 3G technology is a frustration, to say the least. And that's where iPadio is going to, and is proven the case for, that many businesses are looking at what you can do with an ordinary 2G signal by way of things like our voice form work and staff polling and so forth, through a standard phone signal rather than reliance on a 3G connection. If I want to get a bit more expansive about that, I'm also interested in emerging markets. And here's an interesting fact for you. In Australia, the second largest telco is Iridium, the sat phone people. Now, just reflect on why that would be the case. Now, Australia is mostly peopled on the edges. It's a very big place with a very small population. Therefore, the idea that you would place masts everywhere is not happening, whereas a satellite signal will work from anywhere. So that's also an interesting concept in Africa as well, where because they've gone straight for mobile and not done fixed line, there isn't the massive infrastructure support problems of sticking cabling all over the place. They've gone directly for masts. And so 2G coverage in Tanzania, for instance, I believe is nearly as good as that in the UK, and yet that's happened in very short amount of time. So if I was to make some more predictions, I think more careful thought around what you can do with 2G telephones, what's the opposite of a smartphone? A stupid phone? I don't think that's fair. But turning a stupid phone into a smartphone through clever interaction, through the use of dial tone and voice instructions to allow people to actually reach into the web when they're outside of the web. Mark also asked me to make some comments and observations about podcasting in general. I love podcasting. I love radio. I've got a face for it, people tell me, so that's probably fair. So one of the other predictions I'd make is that I think podcasting might make a little bit of a resurgence inside corporates, because it does also play to smartphones with limited connectivity. Only yesterday I was with a company who have BlackBerries across the board, so thousands and thousands of them, but they can't rely on 3G signals because a lot of their people are out and about in their cars. So some kind of corporate product which does what iTunes does for podcasting but isn't iTunes, because iTunes doesn't have a sensible approach for business, that allows those smartphones to drop down podcasts to their devices whilst they've got a signal and listen to them through their headphones when they're driving around in their cars and their vans, is actually going to be a very significantly useful product for 2012. If I was to be hugely pretentious, I'd hope that as Yammer is to Twitter, iPadio will become to iTunes. That's outrageous, and that won't happen in 2012, but we'll give it a shot. Cheerio.
My name is Jack Wraith, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Telecommunications United Kingdom Fraud Forum, which is a forum operating primarily in the United Kingdom, but also very close working relationships with similar forums overseas. As we expected, fraud was going to start rising overall within telecommunications, and this has proved to be the case certainly in 2011. Although it is still very low traditionally, because most of the telcos now have got very robust systems in place to prevent fraud. We knew with the economic downturn that telecoms particularly would become targets for fraudsters. We've seen quite significant increases in the traditional forms of fraud, the international revenue share fraud, which I think is one of the major issues facing operators today. And that's primarily where the fraudster has identified that if they are able to commit their frauds over a number of jurisdictions, a number of international national borders, then their chances of having an investigation leading to an arrest and a prosecution are minimal because of the complexities of cross-jurisdictional issues. And we've certainly seen fraudsters, I say fraudsters, organized criminals, operating in that particular space. We've also seen, as we would have expected, what I would call chancer. That's the person who's, under normal circumstances, would not have even contemplated committing fraud, but see an opportunity and go for it, primarily because they've been made redundant or economically they're stretched. So that's the sort of background for 2011 that we expected and we have seen. Interestingly, 2012 I think may be better. And that may be better because people are beginning to realize, yes, there are cross-jurisdictional issues in relation to the investigation of fraud, but our global organizations such as the ITU and the like, I think at last are waking up that there has got to be more control over money flows within the telco sector. As an example, here in the United Kingdom, the premium rate money flows are very well regulated, and if there is a suspicion of fraud, those monies can be withheld almost instantly until an investigation goes on. Internationally, that's not the case, and I think we will possibly see inroads into what has up to now been quite a strong resistance to have a similar international process as we do have a national process. I think also 2012 are going to see some changes. The economic situation is going to impact on telcos as it does anywhere else, but there is a number of new technologies out there, I say new, expanding technologies out there, which are going to have their impact with both the consumer and the telco. And just to name two, mobile money through the form of near-field communication enabled devices, I think will be starting to take off in 2012 into 2013. We're waiting for that, what I would call that Kindle moment, that tipping balance, which will see the way people use mobile devices to transact financial transactions. In other words, instead of a credit card, instead of paying for cash. I think we're edging towards that tipping point. We're not there yet, but interestingly, when one looks at the number of NFC-enabled handsets which are scheduled to come on stream in 2012, you see a significant increase. So we're getting there. So I think that will change the scenery in terms of telecommunications. And of course, it will also bring with it its own challenges, because we're then combining the traditional communications type of fraud with financial, institutional type of fraud. So again, we've got to be well prepared for that. I think the other aspect is the expansion, especially in most of the Western civilized countries, of Wi-Fi connectivity. Almost anywhere now you can get Wi-Fi connectivity. What does that do? Well, it causes a bypass of the traditional network connectivity. So again, we've got to start looking at how, as telcos, we can secure ourselves against what are effectively open borders, but also, more importantly, how do we get the ARPU, that's the average revenue per user, to come back somewhere near to what telcos need to show profitability? And that's going to be the challenge, I think, of 2012 and beyond.
But overall, 2012 could well have less mobile crime than this year.
I believe so. We're becoming much more mature. We're becoming much more cross-border in our approach to criminality committed against the telcos. Certainly, nationally, I think we are very robust, and we've got some measures and processes in place which enable us to go after the criminal who commits fraud within our national borders. What we've now got to do is learn from that and expand that beyond the national boundary.
Thank you to all our guests today. Jack Wraith of Tough and MyCAF, Windsor Holden from Juniper Research, Mark Smith of iPadio, Steve Litchfield, whose work you'll find at stevelitchfield.com, and Hans Eriksson from Bambuser. This programme has been produced by The Phonecast and is sponsored by 51degrees.mobi. To listen online or to download each broadcast automatically, head for our website, thephonecast.com, where you'll discover an RSS feed, an iTunes link and a built-in audio player. If you're using a mobile phone, you'll find our mobile website at the same address. It'll automatically identify the handset you're using and will tailor the information to fit the screen. We also produce regular news updates in a separate podcast every Wednesday morning. You'll find it on our website, on the Mobile News website at mobilenewscwp.co.uk, and on the Independent Mobile Phone Dealers Association site at impda.co.uk. This coming Wednesday, the three of us at the Phonecast will be making our own predictions for 2012. Thank you for listening today. Please join us online next week.